than using that state definition, just because the state definition, I think, would actually be pretty easy to meet, just in terms of doing the bare minimum there.
So would you add that as language to the state then? And in addition, there would be a site visit?
So I'm suggesting not using that state language at all, and sticking with the original language, which is a use accessory to a principal use of agriculture or animal husbandry. So in that case, the planning board can determine whether or not the principal use is actually agriculture or animal husbandry.
But isn't that an even squishier definition? Agriculture, I have that much asparagus growing in my yard, which is a perennial, which you put in once and it lasts 15 years and you get asparagus for 2 weeks in the spring.
I think that they're both kind of squishy, unfortunately. I mean, if you manage to sell your asparagus for $2,000, you're still in the same boat.
The key is the word principal.
Yes.
The principal use.
So I think that the
Right.
word principal use is allowing, if you have, a single family dwelling and a 10 by 10 patch of asparagus, I think arguably your principal use is single family residence. Your principal use is not agriculture because of your asparagus patch. If you have, 2 acres of actively tilled and farmed land, I think you can argue to the planning board that, we're using this for agricultural purposes actively, and we do this, this is our principal purpose on this lot. So if the committee feels differently, we can certainly put different language in there. This is my opinion in terms of what would be, how the planning board would better be able to keep this activity to places that are actually, participating in agriculture or animal husbandry.
I like the idea of site visit, but is that practical?
I think it is practical, and, we've certainly, obviously, this is not a final draft, so we would, we'd talk to the attorney and everything beforehand, but we do have site visits already for the planning board. They do them for subdivisions usually, and I expect that we get subdivisions more often than we'll get applications for this use. So I don't think that it would be impractical from what I've seen from the planning board so far.
I think it's a good idea.
What if it was a combination of both?
The state definition
Principal
and,
use well, what I'm thinking is someone comes from the opposite way and says, well, it is my principal. Look, I meet the definition for a farm in Maine I have. And here's my $2,000. I sold a head of asparagus. To the guy who wanted to have a wedding for $50,000. It didn't matter. It cost an extra $50,000.
Asparagus don't have heads, Dan.
So,
Poor asparagus, picking on it.
so I'm wondering if if you include both, then they said, great, you met that condition. Now we're going to go out there to your site and do a walkthrough.
There are two aspects to the condition.
Yeah, so it addresses the issue of, hey, I meet the requirement in the state of Maine as being a farm, why aren't you letting me do this? And we say, well, that's part of the definition, that's part of what you have to do. The other part is gonna be a site walk that really demonstrates that the majority of the work being done here is agricultural in nature. Not just a
Yeah.
garden.
So keep the
I
word
think-
principal, add the revenue element.
Right, so it's principal use plus you've got the revenue.
I think that could avoid arguments.
Yes, that's what I'm
Yeah.
thinking of, to make it easier on the planning board. I do like the idea, Nadia, of the site
Yeah.
walk, though.
That's a good idea.
I'll just make a comment and
Yeah.
I'll work that out, how to
Okay.
add in the site walk in a way that makes sense.
And I guess we did add and discuss adding animal husbandry, right, as well. I don't.
Right, we had omitted that
Yeah.
from the definition. It's and or.
Yeah,
All right, and then the next question I had was, why aren't we just saying that this is a use in every zone where we have agriculture? Every single zone in town except for Dock Square allows agriculture in some level of use, whether it's permitted or conditional use. I don't think that that's the direction that we want to move, where every zone is able to do this, but if the committee thinks that it shouldn't be tied to the zone and should instead be tied to the allowance of agriculture, certainly is a discussion that we can have.
So we'd be looking at the free zone, what was it?
So we said village residential, free enterprise, and farm and forest as the three zones that this would be allowed.
And you're saying perhaps take out the village residential?
So there was a question last time as to why is it not allowed in every zone where agriculture is allowed? We have many more zoning districts than those three. And some of them, I don't think that this would necessarily be a great fit for. I'm thinking of like Cape Porpoise Square and those types of places. But, you know, if the committee would like it tied just to the agriculture use and not to the zone itself, certainly is.
Do
Is
farms
an option.
exist with some of the other conditions we put in terms of size and so forth in the other zones?
I don't believe so. When we did a few meetings ago, when we found all of the farms in town, they are all in these three zones. So we made sure to include all the zones that currently have farms in them.
Isn't there stuff up on Route 9, past the fire station, where Bryant Lane is?
I think so, and I think
Right
that
to the
that
farm
is
stand or
free
something.
enterprise.
That's
The
5
5-acre
acre.
farm?
5 acre, isn't that in Goose Rock
I
zone?
thought that was Goose Rocks.
I think it's in free enterprise, but
Split the
let me take a look.
It's probably, it might be past Goose Rocks.
Yeah, it's pretty.
Yeah, I don't know whether, I thought it went all the way to the property line,
Because Goose Rocks is 500 feet on
on the other side of the
the
road.
other side of the road
Oh, it is.
of 9, and I think it was all the way out.
All the way to
I
the
thought it
end
went all the way
of-
out to Biddeford, was Goose Rocks. I might be wrong on that.
Well, you
I
had.
don't know what the exact
you-
address
I
is,
think,
but
I think we raised, there were two questions that were raised. I think I raised, well, how could you do this in village residential? And then we realized there were large properties left in village residential. That was one. And the second one, someone asked about the Goose Rock zone, and you mentioned the beach use agreement and the restriction on commercial activity.
I think that's just, the beach use agreement just applies to Goose Rocks Beach itself, I think.
No, it applies to the zone.
To the whole Goose Rock zone?
I believe so.
I would have to check on that. I'm not an
Then
expert in
5-acre
that.
farm would have been grandfathered in potentially? Is that?
So it is in Goose
Yeah.
Rocks, I just
If
looked.
it's in-
That is a concern that Galen and I had when we were originally picking the zones, was commercial activity in Goose Rocks. So
Okay.
it's, I would have to look at the beach use agreement. I'm not
Okay.
familiar with the exact boundaries.
That's there
Wow.
too.
Right.
That's over on the other side of it. No.
So this is something that could be added later on, in subsequent years. There could be an interest in maybe expanding.
Yeah,
Well, but if they're already
Right.
in there operating,
we want to make sure we capture them.
we want to capture them
Right.
if we're giving the privilege to other people, but not them.
Would that be of interest to the people of Goose Rocks? They would be all right with this sort of thing of adding in
It depends.
agricultural commercial use?
If there was a huge party going on every weekend at the Goose Rocks Dairy, who knows?
And
There was,
But if you go back to the comprehensive plan, part of it is we do want to encourage agriculture, so
Right.
if there's, I think we might prefer that to, a new development or,
Right, in the right place.
well, people have
Right.
tried, though, to put in, like, there's a new development that is just going in to the west of Dyke Road, right past that resort, and the resort
yeah,
yeah, near the campground, past the resort. And I remember their first or second plan, they had a commercial strip along Route 9 or just in from Route 9, and they didn't realize they were in the Goose Rock
Right.
zone, and it wasn't permitted by the ordinance, not by the
Yeah.
beach use.
Okay.
but would agriculture be excluded, be an exception to the,
I don't know what's
Commercial.
permitted and,
The agriculture is in some way permitted in every
right,
zone except for Dock Square.
Right.
So some zones, it's a conditional use, they have to go to planning board, but it is in some way, there is an avenue for agriculture in all of the zones except for Dock Square.
So having listened to the concerns that were recently voiced at meetings, I'm wondering that what we have now is sufficient for the current activities, agricultural activities at Goose Rock, because this agritourism would add a level of entertainment
Right.
and noise and activity.
above.
and parking, which might cause an issue of concern to the people of Goose Rocks.
But wouldn't it, all the other conditions we put here kind of preclude that from being a big issue?
Well, I think you'd still have entertainment at us, and it can go up to, what, 200 people? I'm trying to remember what we were saying, and,
I think we try to back it down to 150, I recall.
but I'm just wondering if you wanted to see what the demand was in a year, and then that's something that could be added if Goose Rocks.
So the beach use agreement says, following the date of this agreement, the town shall not propose changes to the land use ordinance that would have the effect of permitting commercial uses not currently allowed or other uses that would increase housing densities in the vicinity of the beach. If such changes would materially intensify the use of the beach in a matter or to the extent that it would change the character.
I think that speaks to agritourism,
It would be commercial
entertainment. It would
activity.
be-
I think people would not be happy, but
And that definitely is the full zone, not just the beach area, which is not even-
I think that you could probably interpret area surrounding the beach or whatever you just said as, you know,
'cause
I think it's-
when you're in Route 9 and you're talking about a farm, I'm
well,
not,
it's the commercial activity
right,
anywhere. It could be, you know, if you put up an amusement park a mile off the beach in Free Enterprise, and you had a zoning change that enabled that to happen, then arguably it would be a problem under this agreement. You'd have to
and-
prove,
and agriculture's not
it
excluded.
says
or-
commercial activity, commercial use.
but agriculture is technically permitted
Yeah.
It's
in
allowed, so
Goose
somebody
Rocks.
could go in and
Right.
put a new farm in Goose Rocks. What they couldn't
be
do is
great.
put something new that's commercial related.
Right.
So this piece becomes a conditional secondary use, which may have an issue with the agreement. We'd have to have the attorneys take a look at it. I mean, I hear what you're saying. We want to make sure if there is a farm that's existing currently
Mhm.
in Goose Rocks,
That they're not
we should at
treated
least
differently.
explore it to see and have a good answer why.
Why they have different rights
Why
or
they-
the same
yeah.
rights.
Right, so
But
we
would-
should at least explore that and understand it.
So wouldn't that mean that, though, that if something is in existence right now, it's not doing commercial activities?
Right,
And this, is what we're talking about, is permitting a
Right.
farm to do commercial
Right.
activities. And it would be in conflict, it sounds like, with,
yeah,
an
possibly,
agreement.
so we should at least,
Well,
we should
there-
explore
Well,
that.
Paul, you know this better than I would, but I thought the tides and the general store were the two things grandfathered in as commercial, but there are 5-acre farms,
Right.
Wolf Lobster, those are commercial endeavors right now,
Right,
but they're on Route 9, but in the zone, so,
they're agricultural endeavors.
but they're
But
but
commercial.
they're commercial.
They're commercial, they're
They're
selling,
grandfathered as well.
yeah,
Their grandfather, yeah.
okay.
Yeah, they would be grandfathered as well. And the key here is the town changes its ordinance, which is what we're suggesting now.
Right,
That throws up the red flag.
Right.
The town can't do anything to
right, and this is gonna allow,
intensify.
I'd
Events.
love us to confirm whether
Mhm.
yeah,
existing agricultural properties in the zone with this proposed change to the ordinance violates the agreement or not.
yeah, we should
Right.
just understand whether it does or not, and if it does, then
Well,
we have an argument why we're not
the
gonna.
question is the Goose Rock zone to be included or not in this
Right.
proposal? If it's not, then it's not an issue. If it is,
And I'm saying, since there are existing farms that we should at least understand if we want to include them, so they're not at a detriment
Sure.
compared to other farms in the community.
sure.
Yeah, I certainly look into that further. I think that, I'm interested to hear Galen's perspective on that. I think that my expectation is that we'll want to steer clear of adding any avenue for that in Goose Rocks as much as
Yeah, but
possible.
let's
but-
get a lawyer's opinion on
Mhm.
it, so if someone comes to us and says, hey, I'm in Goose Rocks, I wanna do the same thing they do, why didn't you put that in? We could say, look,
Mhm.
we had the attorneys review it, and it would be in violation of the beach permit.
And the
Yeah,
difference is,
absolutely.
if agriculture is a permitted
Yeah.
use
Exactly.
in the
Right.
zone, then it has a right
Stay.
to have agriculture and to grow agriculture. What's not allowed in the zone is hotels, retail stores. That's what's not allowed in the zone. It's a residential
Right.
zone with whatever permitted uses are allowed in the residential zone.
Which also, a wedding or an event would include alcohol. And I don't know if that is an issue as well that needed to be addressed, based on the recent decision by
Sure.
Yeah.
select board.
Right.
Well, there has been in the past
You
an
near the
issue,
microphone.
there has been in the past an issue with weddings at the beach. I remember a rental property where they were renting it out
Right.
for weddings. And this was a few years back. I think they were told that they couldn't do that. But I don't know
Yeah.
all the details around that decision.
I think it was noise and nuisance. Those were the, those would be the issues, whether I rented the house or whether I owned the house. It would be the same. I don't think there's anything in the short-term rental ordinance that prohibits a wedding. I know that like Airbnb, you can't have a wedding when you
Which
rent
is,
when
one
you-
of the original discussions around this whole topic was beyond agriculture.
Right.
If Airbnbs want to start, so that was
Mhm.
coming full circle.
So we can certainly revisit the zone discussion. I think, in terms of like just putting a draft together, I mean, any language we decide on, we'll send to the attorney.
Sure.
So if the general feeling on the committee is that we would want this use to be allowed anywhere where there is agriculture, I can add that in. And then if, when we send it out as a final draft to get reviewed by an attorney, she says, no, like you can't have this in the Goose Rock zone, then we could come back with that.
Okay.
I think that we've kind of dragged on the discussion about agritourism, and I think wrapping it up, if possible, would be good. So just kind of a
It's
general
not an easy
consensus.
topic,
Does the,
and it's better to do it right than fast.
sure, but as a general feeling,
Yeah.
does the committee want to allow it in every zone where agriculture is allowed, or just in specific zones?
I go for specific zones in light of recent decisions by the town on that, with regards to the alcohol
Okay.
aspect. But I'm just one of many.
I think the alcohol decision, which is
That's
very
good.
fresh, was very directly connected to the tides and what they believe that, how they believe the tides is conforming or not conforming with land use ordinance. So I'm not sure they're saying there's a no alcohol in the beach zone. I think it's more about a specific issue tied to the tides.
And the attorney would answer
Yeah.
this.
What ultimately happened with
They
that?
denied
They
renewal.
denied it at that meeting, but it was only for like 7 days.
no, they denied it last night,
Oh, they did?
but that's another topic.
I don't think,
Oh.
I don't think,
Okay.
it's a whole
Yeah.
different,
So we're thinking any
I-
zone where agriculture?
I think it should be any zone, I think we need to give every farm that meets all of our conditions the opportunity, and then unless we find that it's in conflict.
Yeah.
yeah, I guess the other approach is what you're suggesting, is to go slow and start it out and see if there's, in the areas where it's least likely to cause a problem, as opposed to ending up next to Liz's house, and, because there's a field back there.
Easier
and-
to allow later
Yeah.
than pull back.
That's a valid point.
I mean, I think that was yours and Galen's approach,
Yeah, I think it
where it's
makes more
most
sense to
suitable.
start smaller and expand.
So if we did identify specifically the zones where it's allowed, if a farm exists outside of one of those zones, is there an exception process that they can pursue with the planning board?
I think the exception process would be that we would have to change the zoning.
They have to
To
actually
allow
change
for
the,
that.
Change the
Mhm.
zoning. That's at
Or
least
they
a
would-
6 months process.
they would
Right.
come and try for mass gathering permits, which they'd still be entitled to, like anyone else in town, and do occasional weddings that way or occasional events that way.
Or try to get approved as some other use in order to do that. I mean, we have other uses that they could go to for planning board and potentially get approval for specific, like for larger events.
But the original goal, right now, anyone can apply, because there is no direction. We're trying to create direction, but we're actually restricting.
So currently, currently in our ordinance, the best path people have forward if they want to host events is a restaurant use, but we don't actually have any basic regulations for restaurant use in our ordinance. And so the idea of this is to give the planning board kind of a springboard, like
Correct.
right now, someone can come to planning board, the planning board puts whatever conditions they deem appropriate on a specific property, but there's not a baseline level of conditions that are existing. So this would give the planning board, there's already basic conditions that exist naturally, and saves the board from having to decide on a case-by-case basis, how many events should this specific
right.
case be allowed to have? And the planning board can restrict further if there's a place and if there's a farm that comes and they say, this farm really shouldn't have more than 4 events per year, they can further restrict, but this would give a basic structure to build on.
So I'm comfortable keeping it to certain zones, but I just want to make sure we've captured what are the current farms within those zones. I don't want to leave a current farm out of the,
So that's inconsistent,
Okay.
unless we include the Goose Rock zone,
yeah.
because there are 2.
So I'll check in
But
about
Yeah.
Goose Rocks. Yeah.
I'm confused about, we don't have criteria for a restaurant. If I want to open up a restaurant
Currently, it's,
down the street, I can do whatever I want? It can
well,
look
you
like-
have to come to planning board and get permission as a conditional use, but the planning board basically on a case-by-case basis decides what those conditions are. As opposed to having, in our ordinance, the restaurant use having specific conditions just baked into that use.
Would a town ordinarily have some criteria?
We have criteria for other uses, and
For
so
restaurant use?
I am not sure.
Just we're a town of restaurants. I'm just shocked. And I know that we
There are
have.
more restaurants than there are farms.
Yeah, oh, there are many more, and we have, many questions about why can't we have farmer's market, or why can't we have food trucks? And the answer is we don't have any, we can't fit them in any box.
Mhm.
Are they a restaurant, are they,
That's a good point.
And
So-
we're,
and we've asked to work on that,
mhm.
including our new member, Rob, at the end.
Yeah, the farmer's market box is certainly something we're looking to
The food
build.
trucks would be the same,
Future.
like
Mhm.
towns have food trucks, but we don't have any way to have a food truck if we had a community event or
Yeah, I think that those are good points. But I don't know if they are mutually exclusive with an agritourism
No, I understand that.
ordinance.
I'm just saying, gee, if we had a restaurant ordinance, would that circumvent this whole need for this?
I think that it
Because
could be a potential option. I think ideally we'd have both. Galen and I have spent a lot of time talking about this in the past couple of weeks, and something that we'd also like to talk about, in the future with the committee is potentially changing the allowed uses in some districts. So Farm and Forest, for example, has a huge slew of commercial activity that's technically allowed if you go and get conditional use approval from the planning board. And so I think that something that we're interested in having a discussion about in the future of the committee is, do we want every single use to be allowed in all of these zones? Or is that not really the purpose of the zone? I mean, farm and forest, it's kind of in the name, the purpose should be farm and forest. We are not, so we're looking to see what the appetite is on the committee for changing those regulations. Because right now you allow hotels and motels, restaurants, pretty much clubs, like anything in all those zones. So having a separate use for agritourism would allow you to potentially change the various commercial activities that are allowed while still allowing for farms to have this specific commercial use.
Okay.
Thank you.
So as of now, I'll check in about all the zones that currently have farms. We won't make a blanket every zone that agriculture is allowed, but try to include every zone that currently has an active farm.
Farm or agricultural or animal husbandry.
Mhm.
So,
All right, the next comment we had was, do permitted uses require code enforcement approval?
What section are we at?
Uh,
What was the question?
We're actually in the zoning regulations, and last time there was just a question about kind of what does a permitted use mean? Permitted uses, they don't all necessarily require a direct permit from the code officer, but they are all regulated. So all of these uses, you can, like, if you want to plant a flower bed in your front lawn area, depending on what zone you're in, if you're shoreland, it's a little bit trickier, but generally speaking, you're not regulated on putting some flowers out in front of your house or like a shrub or something. But if any zone that's a permitted use does have regulations, so it doesn't necessarily require you to go and apply for like a building permit or some kind of actual physical permit from the code officer. It is still a regulated use in the zone.
and you don't have to go before the planning board for it.
Yeah,
You're
it's
just allowed
something,
to use it,
yeah,
allowed to do it.
exactly.
Conditional, you have to go to the planning.
Mhm. All right, and then Galen and I talked about there was an idea last time that to avoid the creation of event venues, to not allow any new permanent structures if you've been approved for the agritourism use. We don't think that that's a possibility, especially for farms. We really think that the main right to farm law would make that very challenging. If someone wants to build a barn and it's for farming purposes, and they happen to host a big birthday party in the barn, we can't really fight with people
Sure.
on whether or not maybe they store hay in the top. So we don't really think that that's a viable path to not allow any new permanent structures
With a conditional use.
with that conditional use.
I get that, if they end up building a barn, they're building a barn. Even if they're doing it just for the event, it's still a barn and but it fits with the character, right? Versus, a huge 20 by 40, 50 stage, with speakers set up and all the rest, and then, lights and all for that. I mean, that doesn't fit with what a farm would be, and I think you could easily say show me how that's used for farming. Right?
Mm-hmm. But if they can show you how they're
I know
going to
there's
use
a lot
it
of
for
stuff in
farming.
our ordinances that aren't always the easiest thing for the code enforcement officers to go through and say, that doesn't fit or that fits, and they have to make a judgment call.
You could say
That's,
a permanent structure that's principal use is for entertainment, can't be. If its principal use is farming, no one would object.
And I think they,
However, if it's a big white tent with, and in the winter, maybe they throw the tractors under there, but it's used for, 10 events a year with, and it's there 365 days, a big white plastic steel structure with open sides.
but if they use it to store the tractors when it's not being used for an
That's
event,
why I'm suggesting its principal use. They can build anything they want related to their principal use, but they can't build permanent structures related to this secondary use,
To entertainment.
entertainment.
permanent structures,
Try that on Galen.
sure, I'll ask him
Because that's not gonna violate state law.
from a regulating standpoint on our end, like
We
it's
understand.
it's a
That's why you get
very
paid the big
tricky
bucks.
situation to be in. But yes, I will.
Well, I mean, that'll be going to the planning board, right? And the planning board can look at it and they can challenge, because it has to go to them, and if they wanna build something.
Well, I
Well, they wouldn't have to go to the planning board if they just go pull a permit to
Well, they'll
build a
have
barn.
they'll have to pull the permit.
Yeah.
And if it's barn, it's a barn.
Right.
I have seen in other towns where someone has built a barn or taken a current barn and reconfigured it, and they've added a stage, they've added a special fire and electric to meet building code, they've got a window to serve food and drinks from, and so it's very clearly something that's not storing hay, it's
Anymore.
something they're going to entertain. So, when it gets to that level, it kind of tells you what it is.
Mhm.
I think, yeah, I think I have faith in you guys.
And certainly run it by and see what we end up with.
You can always bring one of us down to help.
Have to go to growth planning committee now, not just planning board.
Yep.
All right, so then we had a question about how many events are usually allowed, and as we just talked about, the closest thing that people can kind of come to get approval for is a restaurant use. They could argue a different use instead, but basically, likely how many events are currently allowed by a property is up to the discretion of the planning board when they go for planning board approval.
Did we have a cap? Did we say something like 8 events?
For this ordinance, yes, we capped at 8. The current language is 8 events per calendar year with no more than 2 per calendar month. So that's,
Can I just make a comment at this point on noise?
sure.
You had indicated that we didn't really need to deal with noise because we have a general noise ordinance that would apply to any activity in town, aside from our hours. And then I asked you this week to show me the noise ordinance, which I then looked at, which you might want to pull up. It has a lot of exceptions. You could drive a lot of trains through it, but one of them specifically is any event, I don't have the exact language, any event allowed by the town, any occasional event allowed by the town is exempt from the noise ordinance. So, there's lots of stuff like construction and fire, blasting.
Leaf blowers.
What?
Leaf blowers are allowed.
Yeah, leaf blowers, all those things are exempt. But one of those many exemptions is anything that's allowed, any event allowed, any occasional event allowed by the town. So, to my way of thinking, that relying on that doesn't do us any good. 80 a year would be an occasional event, so I think we need our own noise section in here.
That's fair. I think we could just copy over the noise
Without the
requirements
exceptions.
without the exceptions. So
Yeah,
keep the
just
decibel limits.
Specs.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good point.
Okay.
All right, and then the last question that we came up with from last time is, does this section disallow future mass gatherings outside of the conditional use? I think that would be language if that's the intent, is to not allow any additional mass gatherings. If it's non-commercial, I don't think we have much, people have to get a mass gathering permit, but we're not regulating non-commercial activity. But we can certainly work with the attorney to find the right language to make sure that there's no additional gatherings outside of what's being allowed by this specific use.
Great.
I think that's to me feels like legal language that I don't necessarily have the capacity to write in a binding kind of way. And then that's kind of where we wrapped up. I think that
We didn't finish though.
yeah, we didn't finish with the document, so I think but I'm pretty sure we got all the way through the social gatherings piece. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Not sure, did we discuss, the overnight stays piece,
We didn't really,
yeah, we didn't discuss that. I'm
where is that? I
technically in
forget.
favor of that.
Number 5.
It's number 5 and
Oh,
C
right.
and number 2 and D.
You're definitely what?
I'm not really in favor of that. I think if they want overnight stays, they can fight for the short-term rental like anyone else. I'm not sure why
Yeah.
Sure.
it'd be
Yeah.
any
They shouldn't
different.
have special privilege
Yeah.
Yeah,
above somebody else who's on a waiting list
right.
Okay.
for short-term rental license.
It says it's limited to the
Right.
night preceding or the night following.
But still,
unless there is a short-term rental license.
If they have short-term rental license, and that's, meets that requirement.
All right,
So
and
what's the difference between, I put up a building with 25 rooms for weddings, and I apply for a short-term rental license, am I operating a hotel or a auxiliary, secondary, tertiary use to the farming?
that's a good question. 25 rooms for the purpose of sleeping?
Yeah, I mean, who doesn't want that at their wedding venue? So you don't have to drive.
I think
Honeymoon suite, maybe, could just be a honeymoon suite.
I'm not sure. I think that it could certainly, that's something worth looking into. I think that I think our definition for a hotel does involve like separate, like people renting like separately in the space. So I'll look into that. I think that's a good question.
Yeah, and glam camping,
Mm-hmm.
would this allow them to put up 25 tent sites and, charge $500 a night for
So, well, camping is
Okay.
its own thing. So I think at that point they would need to get use as a campground,
which they might be allowed.
which they might be
What
allowed to
zone.
do, depending on where they
that's
are. But outside of the physical structure, if they're setting up tents, that's not really short-term rental territory. So it's kind of its own separate issue.
What if, like, not here, but elsewhere, I know friends go to like knitting camp for a week, or, what if someone wants to do like a farm camp for a week and they put up 8 tiny homes and you sign up and you go with your family to agriculture camp for a week.
I think that from a code enforcement perspective, we would not allow people to put up 8 tiny homes. That would be a great question for a code enforcement officer.
Yeah.
I think. I'm not even sure who the right person
Or
to
even
ask
4
that would
tiny
be.
homes,
Yeah.
Mhm. I would be curious how we would classify those. If people came in for a permit for a temporary structure. But I think that it's kind of,
Well, the structure would be permanent,
Yeah,
but,
those aren't temporary.
so they put up 4 permanent tiny
yeah,
homes,
4
not,
tiny homes.
then,
Instead of having a traditional farm, because
Mhm.
they can't make any money anymore, they decide to run weekly agriculture camps to learn how
they would need to get the proper permitting to put those structures up in the first place, which I think would be challenging in and of itself. If they weren't full dwellings, we would count them probably as ADUs, in which case they would only be allowed to have one. So I think from a permitting standpoint, people would have a very hard time justifying that. But then
We
if,
don't allow weekly in this either, right? Because we limit the number of events.
Right, we're limiting the number of events,
Right.
and now
Yeah.
allowing the structures that are
so it wouldn't
associated
be
with
every
structures.
week.
Although, okay, total devil's advocate here,
Yeah.
I would rather have the owner of that farm be able to put up 4 tiny homes and run an agriculture camp all summer long than sell it to a developer.
Sure, but I don't think that they would be able to put up 4 tiny homes per our ordinance necessarily.
Because they're running a mobile home park, or they're,
Yeah, they'd probably need some kind of different situation, or they would be classified as a hotel or a motel maybe. I don't think it would be as straightforward as just
Yeah.
deciding to
they
build
shouldn't
4
have, they
tiny
shouldn't have
homes.
additional rights that the next door neighbor doesn't have, where the guy across the street who has not a farm and 5 acres, if he can't put up, 5 houses there without a subdivision and,
Right.
or, if he can put up a hotel in that zone, you can put up a hotel in that zone.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think his rights, the farmer's rights should be, better, different than the non-farmer, even though your, instincts of trying to help the
Yeah,
farmer.
I mean, we are changing it a
preserve the
bit, right,
land.
because we're not allowing the residential folks to do this. So we are providing them some, but the incentive is to provide
They still have to have a
another way to make some
primary
money to
use.
keep it, the principal use going forward.
Right, which has a public benefit theoretically.
Right. And you can't, if you have the same lot, you can only have one use on it, right? Unless there's a specific
I
ordinance.
think that there's only one principal
One principal
use.
use.
Mhm.
Yeah,
So,
unless-
so I think if the planning board went on a site visit to a house that clearly had 25 separate rooms with their own bathroom and little kitchenettes, they could clearly say, the principal use here is, this is clearly not designed for agriculture. Like, we're not giving this specific use. So I think that, just encapsulating it under, no overnight stays without a short-term rental license, I don't think is opening us up for a world of trouble. But it's another thing I think that the attorney would look at and let us know
Yeah.
if we're setting ourselves up for a disaster.
Is there a limit on the short-term rental license to how many bedrooms you can have?
No.
So I can have 20 bedrooms.
Yes, you could have 20 bedrooms, but you would not be able to rent them separately. And we do, I mean, I personally, I do keep track of that. So if someone is renting bedrooms as separate listings, we would notice and we would be able to say, you're not allowed to do this with your short-term rental license. Stop renting your bedrooms individually. So we're good with the overnight stays. All right, so then we did add in separate language for agricultural education and immersion activities. So that's, I think Galen told you guys about, if you go to work on a dairy farm or something and you're actively participating in the agricultural use of the property. So we can, I don't know if you guys had a chance to read this section, but we can kind of go through this one too.
My only question on the 25 participants is, let's say it's a school trip, and the class is bigger than 25. If there's an agricultural immersion for a school or something like that.
Right.
Sure, I don't feel married to 25.
Yeah,
as the-
but I understand why 25 feels right,
Mhm.
but you could see some potential reasonable exceptions.
Yeah.
So what would feel like a good
I don't know.
number?
A classroom size is often maybe 30. I mean, if you're thinking in terms of students.
But there would be, depending on the age, there would be, other
Chaperone.
people there.
Yeah.
to- But maybe there could be, unless there's approval by the planning board, I don't know who would approve an additional number.
I mean, no educational group is gonna want a lot of kids all in one location.
But a classroom,
But we're talking about the maximum.
Yeah.
I would put it at 50. No one's gonna do that,
I agree.
but at least
Yeah, I
they're
think,
allowed,
yeah, 50 would certainly cover a class,
right?
Yeah.
Or if they
Yeah.
combine,
Chaperones,
if there's two
teacher,
fourth grades and they
35,
take the
30
whole
kids.
fourth grade, yeah.
the bus driver, or the two bus drivers, depending
Yeah.
how big it is. So that would probably cover it. 50's probably fine for that.
Okay. And then for parking, for this, I did not include the option to shuttle from a separate site to this, but I think that it probably doesn't really matter. As long as the parking is still it's not bleeding out onto the street in any way.
I mean, you can see a school bus dropping off the kids and going,
Still-
parking someplace and having
Down there.
coffee and coming back 4 hours later,
Mm-hmm.
and he's
Park
not
right
even.
out here, it's beautiful parking.
Right.
Yeah, I think that I don't know. I think that I don't feel as concerned about parking as an issue, but I think
It's
we
probably
can
not.
certainly add in the. So in my
but by saying-
mind, I'm picturing the shuttling for social events being an issue because you have potentially 200 people
Right.
being moved in and out, and but for this type of event, you also would anticipate everyone would kind of stay for a long, for like a day, as opposed to maybe just being there for a couple hours or.
But saying on-site solves the on-street problem,
Mm-hmm.
so
Good, as long as it's
Yeah.
not-
let's just say this.
All right, and then for event requirements, all events must be directly related to the principal use of agriculture on the lot.
Mhm.
Or animal husbandry.
I'll add that in. Or in.
On the farm, since we're talking about farms, not lots. And you've used the term farm.
Sure, I can add that in. So that one I think is pretty self-explanatory. If, we're not trying to let people just host any kind of educational activity. If you want to host a knitting class, you should be raising sheep and processing the wool yourself kind of situation. And then overnight stays, I guess we could have the same regulation, no overnight stays without a short-term rental license. And that would, the overnight stays, they would kind of butt up against our occupancy limits. So if they're hosting this in a 4-bedroom house, they're only allowed to have 10 people stay overnight in that home. So it also would kind of naturally limit the number of participants that would be able to stay.
Sure.
I have a problem with the last two subsection C, just as I have a problem with what the town's attempting to do now on short-term rentals, even though that ordinance doesn't contain this language, current MUBEC requirements. So this means I could build a property, my farmhouse, which I've lived in for 100 years and I want to have 6 guests stay, this would say, well, the staircase is no good, the railings are no good, the window sizes are no good, let me see what else. There's like 10 or 15 things that immediately pop up on older homes, or even newer homes built today that don't meet next year's requirements. So I invest, I decide I'm going to do this, I'm going for it, and next year the state decides the walls have to be 8 inches thick, not 6 inches thick, and I can't have my oil furnace. You're going to make me upgrade to,
Did we just eliminate this?
what's that?
Is this the one that we just,
No, this is,
I just took out the whole section and replaced it with are not permitted without a short-term rental
Okay.
license.
Is that allowed, is that in the short-term rental one?
the short-term rental
Doesn't talk
does
about
not say
Okay,
that. It
okay.
just says, we're going to do inspections, and this is not in the standards for a short-term rental. So the
Okay.
problem is, people have invested
Yeah.
in their properties, have thought they've done everything right.
Sure.
And it says, then when it comes to the inspection side, it says you have to meet these standards and lists them all, smoke detectors and whatever. And then in the inspection sentence, it says we're going to make inspections, which they haven't done, but now they're starting to do. And there it says, and meet building standards. You have to meet our standards as well as the building code. And everybody, of course, interpreted the building code to mean the building code, and you were grandfathered when the code becomes tougher, etc. So
Should be.
the big issue for the short-term rental people right now, I do have a license.
Yeah.
I don't currently use it, but I do have a license. Are bedroom window sizes. Plus everybody went out and bought all these smoke detectors, and now they say they have to be interconnected, not just one outside every bedroom. And so now they have to be hardwired or, Wi-Fi connected. But that's cheap compared to, I just replaced a bad picture window and 2 budding windows, and in one room, not a bedroom, but it's like $5,000 just for one room. So if your windows don't meet the 5.7 square foot size, 20 by 24, so there are a lot of people very unhappy right now with the code office.
Yes.
So, anyway, that's why I objected to that.
So I think I mean, I wasn't really having an easy time thinking of other regulations that I would feel would need to be put on this type of event, because I'm not really expecting it to be large. It likely will not involve anything insane. So are there any other regulations that the committee thinks would be appropriate or necessary to put on this type of event?
I don't have anything more to add.
I'd say let's look at the next draft and
Sure.
take a look at it.
Where do we talk about how many events?
It's on,
And does that apply to both, or just,
good point.
that's the only thing I wanted?
Event requirement limitation, no, that's not there. Okay, it's
Four.
number 4.
C4.
C4, which is not relating to agricultural educational immersion. It's under the
Okay,
social.
so do we want to limit the education
BC.
immersion activities, or no?
Yeah, I think we should. Rather than somebody drive a train through it.
Because it should be more, the intent is it to be very agricultural, like nobody would even know, right? That
Right.
It could be just workers there working at the farm.
Mm-hmm.
So there shouldn't be loud music and all the other things that aren't normally what you see.
So let's just ask a question. I have a farm right now, and I decide to get a little extra income, so I run a kids' camp. I have a friend who does this in Vermont. So I run a kids' camp for 4 weeks in the summer. Is that permitted now? I'm sure she's under the radar. But is that permitted now, or would that come into this?
That's a good question. It would be a commercial use, so I'm sure
Right.
that it would fall under something. But I would need to look through the uses to see if there's one that's an exact fit, like if people have to get approval to run a summer camp.
Yeah,
That's a good question. I don't have an answer off the top of my head
I
for
would
that.
kind of want that to be allowed
Yeah,
in a,
Day camp.
a day camp.
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, a day camp, just like some others, there's a day
Yeah.
camp at Goose Rocks Beach, there's a day camp at,
Mhm.
the trust runs day camps.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure what our process is for day camps. I don't know if we just kind of let people do their thing in
Right.
terms of day camps, so I'll look into that. That's a good question.
What about an overnight camp? If you've got rooms and places for kids to stay, a small camp?
You saying that would be a good thing, or something?
Well, this says here, overnight stays permitted for 2 nights with a short term.
Yeah, we
So
would
it's only
restrict
2
all that.
nights. But is day camp outside of agricultural use? I mean, we're really focused on an
This would be, I mean, for here, it would have to be agricultural focused, right? So it'd be kids working on a farm, learn about working.
But you're saying is it part of agriculture already?
Right, no, well, it could be, but I'm just wondering where this would be placed. Is this camping, but it's a day camping? Or I'm just wondering if it falls under agritourism as a permitted use.
It would be a secondary use to the principal use of agriculture. Somebody's trying to
So
do a community thing and make a few bucks and,
I'll have to look into day camps as a
Okay.
use.
Yeah, I don't
And
know.
then if it's something that we already regulate on its own, like if it's a use that people have to get, I think that would cover it. If it's not, I can certainly put in language here
Okay.
Are there
to
state-
cover.
Are there state regulations around day camps?
I'm sure that there's some kind of,
Right.
I think anything that involves children
'Cause
is
I-
usually.
yeah.
In the GRBA, actually, I think they officially are not a camp, like, very purposely. They've arts and
sort
crafts
of
program
large
and a
group
tennis
babysitting.
program, because I
Yeah,
think
it's not
they're,
a camp.
I think you're avoiding the term camp
Yeah.
because of insurance and other regulations, I believe.
Sure, I'm sure that there's some
Yeah.
state regulation there. So yeah, that's something I'm certainly
Great.
happy to look into and see.
I mean, if they were doing something, if they grew strawberries or something, and they had day picking strawberries, and would that fit underneath here? I mean, it's
That's part of
education.
agriculture.
That's part of
I
agriculture.
I think
It's
that you pick is
You
maybe,
pick your own and then
Mhm.
they can,
And then that would have a whole
I don't think that
different
would fall under
oversight.
here.
no,
I think you can do that as part of agriculture,
you could do
and there are
that.
regulations
I
about
think, I think
what you can
so.
sell on your farm, and who can you sell to, and you can't sell milk, and, you know, but I think you pick is,
Do we have that, or is that a state?
no, I think it's state.
It's a state.
I think there's more protections from, and I can't remember if it's Maine or New Hampshire, with regards to activities when it's under the agricultural umbrella.
Yeah, it
Then
should be.
instead of, education of children, that's a whole other
Okay.
world.
Yeah,
Okay.
So I'll do some research there and I'll, either add language in or make clear that this language is already existing somewhere else. So that kind of wraps up
And we,
agritourism.
we limited the event attendees to 200? Is that what it was?
Yeah.
I think
Including
50 for,
staff.
Attendees and staff, right?
oh, for the social gatherings?
Including
Yes,
staff.
200.
Okay.
So if everyone, if we're generally good with the questions and so forth now, I'll work up a final draft,
Okay.
probably I'll try to get out there this Thursday afternoon, so everyone has time to kind of look it over and before our next meeting, so that we can,
which is when,
the next meeting should be June 3rd.
June 3rd. Good day.
And I'll need to check, the election is on the second Tuesday of June,
tenth.
is
So the
that
10th?
true?
The
I think so.
it's like the 12th or
The 10th.
It's not the 3rd, I don't think, so
No,
it should
it is
be,
not.
should be
Right.
okay. So before we wrap up, just wanted to kind of let everyone know, Rob sent a thoughtful question about our planning process for what we talk about for the next year.
Yep.
So we'll look at the comprehensive plan and look at the strategies and see kind of where we are in terms of meeting strategies and what we would want to focus on over the next year. We'll probably start that in June and July and see, and kind of set a
Yeah.
trajectory for ourselves. And you responded about the low impact development standards. Galen and I would like to revisit that and talk more about stormwater. Once we've wrapped up agritourism, we'll do that. So I'll also probably bring some stormwater materials to the meeting next week, or not next week, in 2 weeks, which also send out beforehand for review. I don't think that Rob and Anne Marie, I don't think you guys were here last time we were talking about stormwater, but we did spend some time talking about low impact development and stormwater standards for single family development as opposed to just site plan and subdivision
Okay.
review from the planning board. So that's kind of where we're at with stormwater, and we'll start to revisit that and dig into it a little bit more. But hopefully it will not take us a full calendar year to get through stormwater, so it'd be nice to pick some other strategies to focus on as well.
Yeah.
Well, and with that, the discussion of other priorities coming out of the comprehensive plan strategies, some might take a long time, others might affect the November ballot, right? We need to,
Yep, so
Oh, yeah,
so
yeah.
the comp plan, so anything that we want to put on November, we'll kind of, I think Galen and I will bring to you some things that are thinking
Okay.
about or noticing that we are seeing from the town. When we look at strategies, we also will probably focus on the short-term strategies and see how we've done for those. We're coming up on the mark that we're supposed to be really getting through those at this point.
Just to kind of back up a little bit, though, we actually have very little strategies that we're responsible for.
Yes.
We're responsible for the plan. And all these other committees, we went and got their buy-in and boards. We sent them all the strategies. Are these things that you can feel that you ought to be working on? Let's make sure we're consistent. And so it's really the whole, every board and every committee that's sort of responsible for these. And what we've done historically is sort of pitched in where we thought there was a priority thing that needed some support and helped out. if we had availability.
Mhm.
Because we have our own, which aren't too many. We do have a requirement that at least every 2 years, we review and assess the growth management permits. Is it working, you know, the number of permits we have? We assess the map, do we need to make any changes based on how the infrastructure is and the growth area itself? So I think those kind of things we have. We had Mary Beth as our representative from Select Board was really having us focus on the stormwater management due to the issues we experienced with the storms, so that kind of took us down that path. So I think those are the things, like in the LD 2003 I just mentioned, because I knew there was like stuff we did not address. And I don't know if that still needs to be addressed, and should we be part of that or not? I don't know what the right answer is.
Yeah, I think, and we'll certainly kind of delve into that too. We also, there's a new legislative session happening, so who knows what will come out of that and what we will need to.
One thing we haven't really talked about or figured out yet is how do we get updates from the other committees and board members on the strategies that they have and where they're at, where they're struggling, what do they need support in? We just don't really have a good mechanism for that.
Do we have a list of which committee was assigned which
Yeah,
strategy?
yeah.
Okay.
It's in the
Is
comprehensive
It
plan.
is? Okay,
Yeah,
I
there's
might
a
have missed
nice,
that.
I mean, the thing itself is hundreds of pages.
Right.
But there is a nice grid
Of which committee has which,
with the
okay.
committee assignments
I missed that.
right up front.
We did have some that had multiple committees, which
Yeah,
I was a big fan of, but at least we got the list.
Right, okay.
Before, it was in every single chapter, and trying to find the actual strategy was an action plan was difficult.
difficult.
So,
So we do try to keep track of that as well in our office. Some of the committees are hard to pin down in some ways, and I think that they don't all meet consistently.
sure.
And so, but we are trying to do that so we can give you guys an update there as well. I think it is something that we're interested in as well, is getting
Yeah,
more
yeah.
updates from committees, and I think it would be good for you guys to hear
Yeah,
from them
okay.
as well.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
we
it
ought to
would
just have
seem
some
like
type of
every 2
mechanism.
years
Yeah, we should have
might
something.
be time
It would be
to,
great if it would be every year if we could get an update.
well, I think every year is too much to ask.
Is it?
I think, I mean, if it's a 10-year period, if you do it every 2 years,
Well, the
But
issue would be
even
that,
just
you
progress,
know,
yeah, progress.
So
Just,
2032 will be, we'll have to submit a new
I understand.
plan, right? And so that means we gotta at least start in 2029, or whoever's on the committee,
Yeah,
start in 2029, getting that new plan put together.
So exciting things to look forward to.
Yep.
Read your comp plan, get familiar with it again.
And then, just so you guys know, on Thursday, I will be talking to the board of selectmen about the growth planning committee and what we do. They've asked every committee to come forward and talk. So I had to look up our history. I mean, I know a fair amount of it from 2005, but I didn't know all the stuff beforehand. And I was mentioning earlier, the 1996 plan, they detailed all the way from the very first plan was in 1965.
oh, wow.
Wow.
The town's planning board worked with Wright and Pierce Consultings to draft a master plan. So back then, they were even thinking about it. And it just goes through all the changes. And then I have to talk about what our committee work is. Right, so so I talk about the assigned strategies on the comp plan that we have, supporting other committees and boards, review and propose. One of the things is land use ordinance changes, so if some other committee or board has proposed change, it's supposed to come to us before it goes to the Board of Selectmen to make a determination if it's consistent, right, to the comp plan. I mentioned the growth permit acts and work assigned by the Board of Selectmen. Our mission for this year really has been this so far, right? And then we'll start looking at our own tasks, like we just talked. Had to give who's on the board, so got you guys all listed. What support do we want? So my thought was, give us feedback on the things we're working on, and then two, give us direction on stuff you want us to do that might be separate. I don't know if there's anything else you guys were looking for from the board. No?
No, I think that's good.
Okay.
I guess the only
I
one I
mean,
might add is if there are particular strategies that the board thinks are important that might be
That's a good one to add.
sitting on another committee not making progress,
Yeah,
should we lean in and help?
It's depended over the years as to who from the Board of Selectmen has sat on this committee.
Right.
Whether there's a feedback
Level of
loop
engagement,
or-
right.
Right.
Or direction, so it's varied.
And then,
Go ahead.
so, sorry, then the last thing is, what do we want information to the town people that may be listening? And my thing was, give us feedback, go to our webpage, and there's a link there you can click and send us an email, right, or come to our meetings. Right? Let us know what you're thinking. Are we doing a good job, or you don't even know who we are, or? Right? So, that'll be the spiel, I say, on Thursday.
Good, sounds good.
Sounds
Thank
good.
you.
All right.
Yep.
Just
Very
one
good.
other thing on Rob's suggestion on the direction and where we go. If there are easy ones to go to, I would hate for the easy one to sit 3 years because we're working on something else. So I think as we look at them all, we should say, oh, this one's,
Piece of cake.
piece of cake, we could do this in 2 meetings, or,
I think farmers markets is one of the ones that
That
I
would
think we've
seem
talked
pretty-
about a lot on the committee, and is definitely low-hanging fruit in some ways.
farmers market, food
That's-
trucks.
Food truck. Yeah, let's get those two.
Are they, are they lumped together in that?
Well, a lot of farmers markets, will do that, but we've talked about them
Mhm.
as they're both in the comp plan.
Yeah.
As being things that would be desirable for the residents of town particularly, not for the tourists, but something that would add value to.
Forgot
Yep,
we assigned
absolutely.
that to-
And I did note the low-hanging fruit comment about farmers markets.
Yes,
Yeah,
it's sort of
Yeah.
available.
Okay, so does that work for you? Have that discussion? Okay, perfect. The other thing we'll do is, we'll have the election of officers and stuff. We have to do that again in July after the town meeting, or our first meeting after the town meeting, so we'll do that. So remind me on that. Any other business to discuss? Okay, hearing none, I will,
I'll move that we adjourn.
I'll second it.
any discussion on it? All in favor?
Aye,
Aye,
Thank you all.
thanks.
thank you.
Nice seeing everybody.
Thanks, Nadia. Good
Yeah,
job.
of course.